Hello everyone, you're listening to The Right Side of Gaming. Today we're talking about the recent announcements of Spelljammer and Dragonlance materials and some of the controversy that's come with it. So I think a while back they had released an Unearthed Arcana that let us try out some of the test materials for Spelljammer races. So I think we kind of all knew it was coming, but they finally announced it officially, so a lot of people naturally got excited. This is an older campaign setting that they haven't revisited in years, not since I've been playing at least. And you don't have a whole lot of D&D in space type of material outside of something like Starfinder, which is another product entirely. So Spelljammer, they are giving us 3 64-page books, which admittedly altogether is still on the small side. So you have the Astral Adventurer's Guide, which is basically a campaign setting book. You have Boo's Astral Menagerie, which is your monster manual, and Light of Xerxes, which is an adventure book for levels 5 to 8. It also comes with a double-sided map of the Asteroid City Rock of Brawl and a DM screen. Now, 2 of the books discuss the Astral Sea, and this is where the first controversy comes into play. So the Astral Sea is supposed to be the plane of existence between the other planes. In the original Spelljammer, there was a gaseous substance called phlogiston that filled the space between worlds. It was basically what you sailed on to get from one planet to another, or one system to another. It was highly flammable. And each planet, or planetary system, because you'd have the planet, their stars, and all that, were encased in these crystal spheres in the phlogiston. So finding a way into a system was a huge plot point, especially if it was finding one that didn't already exist. Maybe because there wasn't one previously, or you now have a way to get around the main entry point or whatever. Now they are removing the phlogiston and replacing it with the Astral Sea, something that already existed in 5e. So around each planet there's going to be an area of wild space, and that's going to slowly transition into the Astral Sea. I think the idea was they wanted to tie it more to the current 5e lore and the cosmology behind that, with how they have their worlds and planes set up. So in that sense, it makes sense. It's logical. But at the same time, it upsets some of the older players. And not all of them, obviously. But some people really enjoyed the phlogiston. It was different. It was thematic. And I think that's the case with a lot of things. It's one of those things where they have to balance, okay, do we stick with the old version, or do we try something new? And we'll probably revisit that a little bit more later whenever we get to some of the other controversy. For now, though, if you want to try out Spelljammer, these products release in August on, I think it's the 16th. But there's going to be a free prequel adventure in July. I think they said it was called Spelljammer Academy. It'd be great if that was something sizable, as in level 1 to 4, since the Light of Xerxes is 5 to 8. I can't imagine they would release an entire adventure novel for free, because that's, usually an entire adventure 1 to 4, but who knows. Now, along with Spelljammer, they announced some new material for Dragonlance. It doesn't sound like we're getting a full campaign setting or anything like that, but we are getting an adventure module, Dragonlance: Shadow of the Dragon Queen. It takes place at the beginning of the War of the Lance, which is this central conflict to the original Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy. And they're also releasing a co-op wargame, Dragonlance: Warriors of Krynn. Now, Shadow of the Dragon is being pushed as sort of an entry point to the series, which is good because I admit Spelljammer and Dragonlance were both before my time. I'm having to get a lot of this information secondhand, so having an easy jumping in point I can at least appreciate, because I imagine these days a lot of their audience is probably new to some of this stuff, because Spelljammer came out in the 80s, I think, but a lot of us probably weren't gaming, and they probably have a fair amount of their audience that wasn't even born at that time. Warriors of Krynn, on the other hand, is supposed to give a broader view of the conflict, but apparently you can use your characters from Shadow the Dragon in at least part of Warriors of Krynn, which is kind of cool, because being able to move your characters around, have them kind of go from one game to the next and have some continuity is kind of interesting, and I'm kind of curious to see if they'll explore that further. Can we essentially take a character through multiple different games to have some type of story built up over all of it? I don't know. They've also stated that for fans of the original series, there will be some existing characters that play a part in the story. As I understood it, this particular campaign arc that they've got going between the adventure module and the board game take place in sort of a separate part of the world from the original. So you're going to have stuff get referenced, but you're not necessarily going to be affecting the old story so much. So you don't necessarily have to worry about ruining stuff or messing something up, which I can appreciate. Now, the other thing that's really causing a lot of controversy is that the creators of the Spelljammer and Dragonlance settings were not consulted in any of this. In fact, the posts have been going around on Twitter and various sites of the creators saying, yes, Wizards of the Coast is bringing back this setting. No, I didn't have anything to do with it. So we have Jeff Grubb, who I guess was involved in Spelljammer, and then Margaret Wise, who's speaking for her and Tracy Hickman about Dragonlance. Now, on the one hand, I can't speak too much to Spelljammer, but I know we've had Dragonlance in the news within the past year or two, specifically with the lawsuit between Wise and Hickman and Wizards of the Coast. I think I did something on that a little while back. They were making some books. I don't necessarily know if they tie into these new products. We probably won't know for a while. But they had some guidelines for Wise and Hickman about stuff they had to include or couldn't include. I think there were some diversity quotas in there. There was mention of, I think, a love potion that they had to take out because they decided that was offensive. And I think it's kind of important to note, a lot of times these days people have decided that older material is offensive. Books, novels, things like that from 20, 30 years ago, this doesn't agree with my modern sensibilities, so clearly this is evil. And we've seen that with tabletop RPG products as well. Wizard of the Coast had this whole thing where they were posting a disclaimer on a lot of their older stuff that they are reselling. I don't know if it was just digital only or print on demand, but they are reselling some of their older material, and it all says, oh, well, we just want you to know that we don't necessarily share the views that are presented in this book or material, and back then everything was offensive. But I have to imagine if they're having to give quotas and guidelines for Wise and Hickman on their new books, there's a good chance that they probably would have had to do the same with any of their involvement with tabletop RPG material, that they would likely find some of the stuff they did as offensive just because it sounds like they probably just write normal fantasy just like you would have a couple decades ago, probably like they did most likely a couple decades ago, and that just isn't going to cut it these days. So yes, they don't have to be consulted. I mean, Wizards of the Coast owns the property, and I understand why maybe they didn't want to. One, on the case of Spelljammer, because they're trying to sort of change the cosmology to fit their existing product better. One with Wise and Hickman because maybe their views don't exactly line up with Wizards of the Coast. I honestly couldn't say. But I think it is a little telling that Wise and Hickman started their own campaign setting separate from Wizards of the Coast, which I think we've also mentioned before. So, I get that they don't necessarily want to do things the way the authors would. And as owners of the IP, they absolutely do not have to. They can put out whatever they want, and legally, they are entitled to. That said, I think it's better when the creators are consulted. And I think that's what people are upset about. A lot of them are phrasing it as they need to be consulted. This is their world. And yes, they created it, but it is no longer theirs. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be consulted. We see this a lot these days. Star Wars is kind of my go-to example because I was a huge Star Wars fan growing up. But I think we see this in a lot of things. Just because a company buys something and puts something out doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. Too often they're trying to push their own ideas or their own agenda, and they don't really understand the source material. They don't understand the audience. They're too focused on putting out what they want to really think about, is this appropriate? Does this fit what's already out there? Yeah, it'd be a great gesture of goodwill to just include them for the sake of it, but I think these people probably understand Spelljammer and Dragonlance way better than anyone at Wizards of the Coast. And they're probably going to be a lot more faithful to it too. And it's not just making something that fits what already exists, because in theory, Wizards of the Coast could go out and hire someone else that was knowledgeable and do the same thing. But there's also the quality issue. Because let's be honest, whenever the people that really understand it or really care about it aren't involved, the quality tanks. Going back to the Star Wars example, we've seen the sequel trilogy that they put out, and I think there's been some similar issues with a lot of the other content they've done, books, comics. There's no reason to believe that's any different from campaign books for tabletop RPGs, because there's still that element of lore behind all of it. So I disagree that they had to consult Wise, Hickman, and Grubb, but I absolutely agree that it probably would have been better if they did. They probably would get a little bit better quality of product had they pulled these people in. And I think that's also where we get some of these issues with people getting upset around things like the Phlogiston. They're changing things without really understanding the setting, and a lot of times you do get that quality drop. So when we see something about a major plot point or a major part of the lore getting changed, well, obviously that's going to turn off some players. Now, admittedly, the audience for some of that older stuff probably isn't the same audience for 5e. I see a lot of people that really liked the old school settings and material still playing the old school versions of D&D or some of the newer material that just mechanically and in terms of design are still like, your OD&D, your AD&D. Whereas new players probably don't have that experience with Spelljammer. They aren't particularly tied to the setting as it was, so they're not necessarily going to notice any of these major differences because this is going to be their first introduction to it. I think it's just going to be that sort of narrower group where it overlaps, where you do have people that really enjoyed the older versions but are playing the newer ones that are going to be a little miffed, and that's understandable. I think that's all I had for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you want to leave a like, comment, subscribe, that'd be great. If you have any experience with Spelljammer or Dragonlance, or if you've read the books and just want to share some of your favorite parts of the settings, that would be fun. I'd actually enjoy reading that. Again, I'm not really familiar with either of these, so getting to read other people's stories about it would be really cool. And if not, that's okay too. I understand. Either way, I hope you have an awesome day, and I will catch you next time.